You get down to the beer store, there's a beer there with a giant label of the Courrier de Bois kind of paddling a canoe across the moon. This is the flying canoe. And it's a New Year's story, so it's apropos. Now I'm living outside the village of Wakefield, Quebec, 25 miles north of Ottawa, on the banks of the slow and powerful Gatineau River. From my window, I look across the deep-cut valley to the cliffs that hold the river in. My river speaks little English, a bit of Francais, but mostly Algonquin and other mysterious murmurs that voice the same clay tones as the low, dark hills and the wild, wild sky. And in winter, when the sun burns low, the highway ices over and the snow is a silent fist upon the land, then we, alone in tiny farmhouses dotted across Les Collines de Gatineau, turn our backs to the wilderness and warm ourselves around a fire of myth and memory. Before the roads and the hydro grid, before the satellites policed the starry night, before the fingers of digital information groped their way into the Gatineau Valley from radio masts high on Camp Fortune, the river was the only highway. It was the only way in and the only way out. And in the spring, the river was filled from shore to shore with great jams of white pine. All winter was spent cutting and skidding the logs in camps frozen on the shore. The worst time for the rough young men of the logging camps was the stretch between Christmas and New Year's. This was when the days were shortest and the nights long and full of regret. And every man dreamt of home and family. And every man thought of celebrations going on without them along the North Shore in Tadoussac or on the far reaches of the Gaspésie. And it was then the light was weakest. Then the need was strongest. And it was then that the devil came up the Gatineau. And he spoke to them from the smoke and whiskey. And he spoke from the ancient forest. And he spoke from the river in the tongue that was not English, was not French, not Algonquin. He said, I will take you home. It was New Year's Eve. And outside in the moonlight, floating just above the river, not touching the water at all, the men found a long birch bark canoe of a kind not seen since the days of Radisson. And the devil, he sat high in the stern, clutching his great bone paddle. And as the young loggers climbed aboard, the devil took their souls and dropped them like heavy coins, one by one, to his sac à dos. Then the wild ride began. Up into the freezing air they flew, all washed with starlight, while the river wound black far below the silver forest. The men were afraid at first, and they clutched the sides of the great canoe. But as they flew faster and higher down the Gatineau and swung east above the powerful Ottawa, they began to laugh and point, and they grew more and more excited at the hope of seeing home again. By the time they plowed the air over the mighty St. Lawrence, and the lights of Montreal and Quebec were behind them, their joy knew no bounds. And at the devil's feet, the sack of souls writhed and pulsed. His paddle dipped deep into the air. There were the lights of home. Then somehow each young man found himself wrapped in the bosom of his family. Food and drink were hungrily consumed. Children hugged and kissed. Presents exchanged, and then quiet time spent with wives and lovers. All the happy hours swirled past like drifting ice in the Black River. But the morning was thin and cruel. The loggers sprawled in the canoe. They were restive and uneasy. The glorious memories the night before were fading quickly. The air grew steadily colder. The devil seemed to paddle even faster on the return up the St. Lawrence, anxious to deliver his cargo, but to where? The sack of souls was almost still now, but for the odd twitch and rattle. The great canoe swerved northwest at Lac de Dumontagne, and it headed up the Ottawa. Soon the frightened loggers could see ahead the icy mist of the falls at Chaudière and the curtain of Rideau. And the fantastic canoe began its final turn north to follow the Gatineau, but the men knew now that they were never going home. Close by, a bell was tolling. And a great cry went up to see the spires of the church so close above the village beside the river. And as one man, the terrified loggers rushed to that side of the canoe. The canoe began to tip. So caught off guard, the devil slid from his seat of command, almost dropping his great bone paddle to the earth below. Roaring an oath, he reached out to balance the canoe, and subtle as an angel's breath, the bony finger of Lucifer grazed the golden cross atop the village steeple. The great canoe spun wildly down from the sky, slid on the icy face of the Earnsley cliffs, and skidded through the snowy brush to rest finally overturned hard by the rapids. The rockers, the loggers, they ran like laughing fools into the woods, one of them holding high the sack of souls and calling to his friends. The devil caught under his canoe could only watch them go. And these are the stories that are dreamed by the dark hills of the Gatineau. And these are the murmuring tales the river tells.
Wow.